Dawson Mercer finally signed a new deal with the Devils, and the optimism has gone up a notch. And joining me on today's episode to break it all down and also preview the 2024-2025 Devils season is Daniel Amoia from the Hockey Writers. There's a lot to dissect alongside Daniel. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here at the Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. A lot going on within the New Jersey Devils organization. Dawson Mercer finally signed a new deal, and the optimism going into training camp has kicked up a notch as we're just inching closer from the Devils season opener in Prague. And joining me on today's episode to help break it all down is a writer over at the Hockey Writers, my fellow media member who is credentialed. It is Daniel Amoia. Daniel, your first time appearing on the show, and it's an interesting first appearance because, like I said, we're going to be talking about big news surrounding a signing. First and foremost, how you doing?
I'm great, Trey. How are you?
I can't complain. I'm smiling ear to ear because this was an excruciating process of getting Dawson Mercer back. It wasn't a matter if, it was a matter when, because he was a restricted free agent. He held no arbitration rights, and if you were to tell me back in June that this would drag out until late September, I wouldn't have believed you. I said, there's no way that's going to happen. But I want to get your thoughts on the matter first. What were some of the things you were thinking of when you were hearing that Dawson Mercer still has not signed a new deal, and now it finally came into fruition?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, I wasn't too concerned myself just because he was a restricted free agent, didn't really have the leverage there. And we knew there were some reports that they were getting closer in the previous couple days. So, like you said, it was just a matter of when. And Dawson Mercer is a very valuable player. Even in a career worst year last year, he still potted 20 goals. He stays healthy, has never missed a game in his NHL career. So I think that's an important get for the Devils, just that now that issue's out the window, they don't have to worry about it, and they could all just focus on hockey.
Absolutely. And you talked about career lows for Dawson Mercer. It wasn't really the best showing during the 2023-2024 season. Appeared in 82 games. He, like you said, he netted 20 goals, 13 assists for a grand total of 33 points, which was a bit of a far cry from what he did during the historic 2022-2023 season, appearing in all 82 games. Like you mentioned, Iron Man on this team, 27 goals, 29 assists, for a grand total of 56 points. He took a couple steps backwards, but Tom Fitzgerald said during one of his media availabilities over the summer that Mercer is, in fact, a part of their long-term plan, and it's a 3-year extension, $12 million total, so $4 million average annual value. What are your thoughts on the contract and how it's laid out? Because had Dawson Mercer had better numbers, I think you would have seen a bit of a pay increase even more.
Yeah, well, I think with the Devils' cap situation right now, it's something they obviously really couldn't explore in terms of a bigger dollar value, because I think they have less than $1 million now in cap space, so that's obviously pretty tight. Maybe, like you said, if Mercer had a better year last season, they could have maybe did without one of the additions of Stefan Nason or Tomas Tatar, but Tom Fitzgerald himself really emphasized wanting to bring in more depth, add physicality, and he checked all those boxes during the offseason. So I think it's a good opportunity for Mercer to be able to prove himself. We know what he's been capable of, but is he going to take that next step in the same way that Seth Jarvis in Carolina did, and he got that massive payday just recently? So Mercer, obviously, regardless, is going to be a valuable player. It's just a matter of, is he going to trend more towards elite, or is kind of 20, 25 goal guy like his ceiling, and is he not going to get higher than that? So it's an interesting dynamic for sure, and also the fact that he missed now 2 days of camp because of this contract situation. It's going to be interesting to me to see kind of how the lines are going to shake out, if he's going to get action in the first preseason game, etc. There's a lot of question marks there, but the biggest obstacle, the contract is done. So that was the most important thing.
Going back to what you just said, the projected cap space is about $976,000. Money is certainly tight. And here's something you also have to factor in. Luke Hughes is approaching the end of his entry-level contract. This is his final year for that said deal. Shimon Nemitz, not this year, but next year, is going to be his final year for his entry-level contract. And if their careers pan out the way that they're projected to pan out, both those players are going to get paid. And then you got to factor in some other players that are in need of new contracts at the conclusion of this season. People like Jonathan Kovacevic, Nick DeSimone on the Fords, Tomas Tatar, Nathan Bastian, Curtis Lazar, depth assets, because I think that was a big struggle for New Jersey this past season, which was just the overall depth, especially when they dealt with an injury. This leads into my next question. Where do you think the future is for Dawson Mercer and being on this team? Because the Devils might become buyers at the deadline. And I'm just thinking of another scenario. Just humor me. Do you think Dawson Mercer, if he's not having a good year, do you think he'll be used as trade capital?
I mean, obviously anything's possible, but I don't see it as something that's super likely, just because we saw with the Devils' injury woes last season how important it is to have someone who will consistently suit up night in and night out. And that's what Dawson Mercer was. So yeah, maybe he's not someone to the offensive level of Nico Hischier or Jack Hughes or Jesper Bratt, but he's still going to be providing that value in terms of simply staying on the ice, because the Devils lost, I forget the exact stat, but it was like, I think over 300 man games to injury last year. And obviously for their sake, they hope that's not the case this year, but having someone who's going to be that Iron Man and suit up constantly, that's tremendous value. So unless he just completely just does not have a great season this year, and he's like just really, really bad, I don't see a scenario where he's going at the deadline, unless there's some like blockbuster move, like say, I don't know, someone like Patrick Laine, for example, is like going off and Montreal's out of the race and they're going to come up with some blockbuster deal. Something crazy like that. But unless they're bringing in someone whose overall value to the team they consider higher than Mercer's Iron Man ability, I don't really see a scenario where that's going to happen.
Before we continue our discussion with Daniel Amoia from the Hockey Writers, let me tell you guys about GameTime. I've actually used the GameTime app before to purchase myself some MLB and NBA tickets. GameTime Picks. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. All-in pricing, toggling this feature shows a total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views. Get a good view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee, or GameTime, will credit you 110% of the difference. GameTime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in ticketing industry. What are you waiting for? GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets, and it is my go-to app for purchasing tickets. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? It's game time. Okay, let's get back to our discussion with Daniel Amoia. Take it away once again. And let me just make something perfectly clear so that way no one takes this out of context. I love Dawson Mercer, and I feel like he's vital on this roster, and he certainly adds more offensive depth, similar to what you said. Just had to ask the question to go over every scenario, because the past couple years, Alexander Holtz was the odd man out when it came to trade discussions. Whenever the Devils were linked to a big-time player, Holtz's name was always in the mix. It didn't matter what the player was. It could be Timo Meier, Jacob Markstrom. You always heard Alexander Holtz's name in that sort of discussion. And now that he's with Vegas, I'm just curious to see, like, if the Devils are buyers come the deadline, who would theoretically be on the hot seat, but we're a ways away from that, and we don't know how this season is going to pan out. Let's actually talk about the season because training camp is underway. It's an abbreviated training camp and also an abbreviated preseason for Devils because in a little over a week, they got to pack their bags and travel across the pond to Prague to open up their season against the Buffalo Sabres. It's going to be a little different this time around, but based on everything you've been hearing involving training camp, some of the interviews you might have listened to, what have been your impressions so far with this Devils team heading into the 2024-2025 season?
Well, I think, like you mentioned, training camp and the beginning of the preseason is going to be very different. Sheldon Keefe said that what we see in the first few preseason games is going to be very close to the final NHL roster, which you obviously typically never see in the beginning of preseason. So there's going to be a lot of decisions to be made very quickly. I know today they had a scrimmage. There were some standouts. Jesper Bratt and Jack Hughes were doing their thing. Paul Cotter looked really good. But it's just a matter of where everyone's going to slot because once they're on that plane, they're there. You can't come back and get other people. And obviously they'll take a few extras with them. But how they're going to slot those lines is going to be, again, very intriguing to me because there's so many possibilities, so much speculation. And how did they get the highest value out of the forwards, out of their deep pairings? Obviously, we know what the goalie tandem is going to be. But it's just a matter of figuring that all out. And I think it's going to be a great thing for them starting in Prague. Kind of put last season behind. Obviously, it was a tough year. Jack Hughes' own words, he said, quote, "We were brutal last year." And it's just an opportunity, a fresh start, especially kind of cool storyline there with Lindy Ruff and the Sabres the first two matches and then coming back home to face the Toronto Maple Leafs, Sheldon Keefe's former team. So it's just so much that's happening so quick, and it's going to be pretty interesting to see how the Devils are going to approach all of it and how the season's going to kick off.
I have high expectations for this Devils team, and I said, barring anything catastrophic happening, like they deal with a boatload of injuries, I think it's safe to say that it's playoffs or bust for this unit because they are far too talented to continue to be inconsistent. They really need to start racking up the wins more consistently. And let's just be real here. Since it's a completely new team, there's a lot of new assets. There's a lot of moving parts. I wouldn't be surprised if the Devils got off to somewhat of a slow start. There's always going to be some sort of growing pains, especially now that you got a new leader. Christy Flannery of the Hockey News appeared on this show a few months back, and she said, like, playing under Lindy Ruff's system is completely different. Like, it's not for the faint of heart. And now you're going from one system to another. In fact, you're going from two different systems because you had Lindy Ruff, Travis Green, and now obviously Sheldon Keefe. And I think the players are responding well to him, but it's just like it's still going to take some time before the chemistry is at 100%, if that makes sense. So I'm not saying the Devils will be bad or anything. I'm just saying, like, just let's be patient with them because will they start off the season 15-0? Probably not. It's going to take some time. All right, the Devils made a lot of moves over the offseason, reuniting with a couple familiar faces, Tomas Tatar, Stefan Nason, adding Stanley Cup champion Paul Cotter, adding more bodies to their back end, and Brett Pesce, Brendan Dillon, Jonathan Kovacevic, netting themselves a goalie in Jacob Markstrom, finished runner-up in the Vezina Trophy race a few years ago to Igor Shesterkin. Who is your favorite addition and why?
I mean, that's such a hard one because there were so many, but can I give you two answers?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, so I think the obvious one there has to be Jacob Markstrom, just because you mentioned the word catastrophic before. That's exactly what the Devils' goaltending situation was last season. So just bring in that veteran, at least until the deadline. So bring in that veteran in Markstrom who's proven himself, who's been up there in the Vezina race before, who has great advanced numbers, that stability, and in my opinion, he seems like someone who's going to mesh very well in that locker room. So I think Markstrom is just a slam dunk answer there. where he's going to bring that stability, the veteran presence. He's going to be someone else can count on instead of being nervous with whoever they're trotting out in goal. But on a deeper level, and I really want to say is Paul Cotter. I know I touched on him briefly. He had a great day in camp today, but he's someone, if you look at the role that Jesper Boquist played two years ago when the Devils had that great franchise record year, he's someone who's quick in transition, speedy, can chip in offensively. And Cotter is basically that, but the added bonus of that, he loves to throw the body. And that's something, obviously, the Devils have emphasized, needing more physicality. And Cotter's one of the guys who throws the body the most in the entire league. So when you have that, and he's super quick, I want to say he's like 90-something percentile in skating speed. He's someone who's going to fit the up-tempo offense of the Devils perfectly. And we see, I think they've been toying around with the line of Cotter, Lazar, Bastian. And I could see how that line, if that's the fourth line heading into the season, is a line that could really agitate other teams. So Paul Cotter has that scoring touch. I know he scored a highlight reel goal against Philly that I still see bounced around on my timeline from time to time. But and another guy, personality too, like locker room chemistry matters, and he seems like just a kind of like Curtis Lazar in a sense, happy-go-lucky guy, loves to joke, and that doesn't mean he doesn't take his on the ice stuff seriously, but it just means that he in every box basically he's checking off what I think the Devils need. So I know people like to talk about the stars or the big name goalies, etc. But those additions, like Cotter, if he's what I think he's personally going to be, those are the type of moves that make championship teams. And I know you could speculate maybe the price was a little too high, giving up both Akira Schmidt and Alexander Holtz. But bottom line is, if Cotter fills the role that he needs to and makes the Devils a winning team, nobody's going to really care about what they gave up for him. So I think that was a great, very underrated move.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you just said, which is I do like Paul Cotter. I love the physicality he brings. And if he and Brendan Dillon maintain that same consistency when it comes to hits, they're going to blow Blake Coleman's single season hits record wide open. It won't even be close. But for Cotter, yes, he's a former Stanley Cup champion. He was mostly a bottom six player for the Vegas Golden Knights, and he does skate very well. But honestly, I think the Devils gave up just a tad bit too much for him. Not saying that I don't like him as a player, but Akira Schmidt and Alexander Holtz, I feel as though if you were to package those players in a different deal, you could have gotten way more. Because similar to what I said earlier in this episode, Alexander Holtz was involved in a lot of other projected trades, like for Timo Meier or Jacob Markstrom, and now you kind of settled with Paul Cotter. But I get that it was necessary because physicality was a point of emphasis. If I could be honest with you, I think Stefan Nason was my favorite addition for New Jersey because similar to Cotter, similar to Dillon, the Devils were in need of some more physicality, and I think Nason can definitely provide a spark here or there. He's never a threat to score, but he can get his name into the score sheet. And we saw it during this past year's playoffs. He was electrifying and he knew when to score when he needed to. And I know Stefan Nason played with the Devils a few years ago, but that's not the same Nason that we're getting nowadays, because Nason has grown and developed so much as a player. And I was really inspired by his story of just bouncing around between the NHL and the AHL, getting his shot with the Chicago Wolves of the AHL, and then he later ended up getting a much bigger role with the Hurricanes, and the Devils saw that on full display in round 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs a couple seasons ago. And I think Eric Haula unfortunately got the short end of the stick when he and Nason went toe-to-toe at one point. But I think Stefan Nason is going to be very exciting, and in his words, he works his balls off. All right. Let's talk about your personal expectations heading into the 2024-2025 season. I shared my thoughts, and we talked about some of the big offseason additions. But where do you see this Devils team going? Are they a first-round exit? Are they a Stanley Cup contender? Or if you want to say like they're missing something here or there, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, I do want to say I don't see them getting first place in the Metro. I am still personally very high on the Rangers. I think just with Igor Shesterkin alone, he's going to steal them a lot of games. And I mean, that was just a dominant team last season, and they really aren't much different except they're just a year older. They didn't add much, but you have guys like Lafreniere who are doing so well. They're younger guys, and then you still have their core who are not yet to the age of, say, Malkin and Crosby. They still got a few years left in them. So I know a lot of people probably don't want to hear that if you're a Devils fan listening to this, but I do think the Rangers are getting that number one spot. So I think the Devils are really going to be either 2 or 3, depending on how Carolina goes. They lost a lot of pieces. But I still see, again, barring anything catastrophic, like you said, I see them getting one of those Metro spots. I would say most likely number 2, and then it's just a matter of how the playoffs go from there. Obviously, for Sheldon Keefe's sake, he would hope that it goes better than it did in Toronto for the most part. But it's really just a matter of if they could click on all cylinders like they did in the 2022-23 season. You had that dominant defense, you had the offense clicking on all cylinders and basically skating teams into the ground. And I would argue this goalie tandem is better than the Vanacek-Schmidt one from then. So it's just a matter of how they're all going to mesh. And sometimes, I don't want to say it's lucky, but there's a little bit of luck involved because sometimes you get groups. And look at the Nashville Predators last season. On paper, they were definitely not the most talented team, but they just meshed so well together, and they were able to skate other teams into the ground and just click. And that's obviously an important thing. It's not always about what you have on paper. So that's why I'm not going to get myself too high and be like, oh, Devils winning the President's Trophy or something like that, because it's just not realistic. There's so much that can go wrong in an 82-game season, as we saw last season. So it's just a matter of how everything's going to get implemented. Like you said, Keefe's system, how they're going to respond to that. Like you also said, I think they have responded to that well so far. And Keefe has experience with young players, so I think he'll be able to get the most out of them. And I think you can make the argument that the core in New Jersey is more talented than the core in Toronto was. And bottom line is, take playoffs aside, Keefe in the regular season, he dominated, period. His entire tenure there. The Leafs were probably betting favorites like every night. So, and that's because they were so dominant in the regular season. And the Devils need that, because you can talk about playoffs all you want, but you got to get there first. And we saw that catch up to them last season. So obviously the players were frustrated last season, and the organization was frustrated. That wasn't what they had in mind. But sometimes you got to take that step back to take that bigger step forward. And I think that's something the Devils can possibly do this season.
Before we close out today's episode, let me tell you guys about FanDuel. You've heard me talk about FanDuel in the past, America's #1 sports book, but I have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com, download America's #1 sportsbook, visit FanDuel.com to look at the odds, and please remember to always gamble responsibly. Okay, let's wrap up today's episode with Daniel Amoia. Take it away once again. Similar to what my colleague Joseph Stanislaw, fellow writer over at Pucks and Pitchforks, the site I work at, he said, look, he hopes that the Devils don't become President's Trophy winners because there's some sort of curse. And usually the team that wins the President's Trophy doesn't end up winning the Stanley Cup because the playoffs are a way different animal than the regular season. Just wanted to come to your defense in that sort of case. And yeah, a lot can go wrong, but I think this Devils team definitely has a lot of upside. And I have compared this Devils core four to the core four out in Toronto: Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier. And then out in Toronto, Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, John Tavares. I think Sheldon Keefe is going to fit like a glove with the Devils because he has another dynamic core four to work with that can lead him to the promised land. hopefully, like you said and like I said, everything meshes well. All right, Daniel, my final question for you is, you already shared one hot take, which is you think the Rangers are going to be number one. And I don't personally think that's a hot take, but other people who are, like you said, Devils fans who are listening to this show might view it as a hot take. But to close out today's episode, give me your spiciest hot take heading into the 2024-2025 season.
I think this is the year that Jack Hughes stays healthy for at least say 75 games, and I think he's eclipsing 100 points. I know that's been a big goal for him, and it hasn't happened yet, but he came so close, obviously, 2 years ago, 99 points, and I think this is going to be the time that he eclipses 100. And with that, that kind of goes hand in hand. If Jack Hughes is scoring over 100 points, I think the Devils are a surefire playoff team and in a great position to make a deep run, provided that health is on their side.
We'll see what happens, but Jack Hughes staying healthy, it seems like we always have this discussion year after year after year, but we saw what could potentially happen when he does appear in most of the games, as evident during the 2022-2023 season, and hopefully he can finally become the first Devils player in history to eclipse triple digits. All right, Daniel, we talked about everything from the Dawson Mercer contract to the upcoming season, training camp, hot takes. Where can my audience find you at?
All right, so I'm a journalist for the Hockey Writers, so you can follow my Twitter, Daniel_Amoia. I see it's right on screen here, so that's pretty easy. And there you could find all my articles, all my Devils coverage, etc. I also run Devils.report on Instagram. I've been running that since 2018, covering the Devils there, and I also host the Shout at the Devils podcast. So, yeah, really exciting stuff. Obviously, I appreciate all the support on the articles and stuff like that. The fan base has been great, and really, it was a long summer. I'm just excited for hockey to get going again.
I think a lot of people can resonate with you in that sort of aspect. We just want the season to get off and going. And honestly, I think people want to skip over the season and just head straight to the playoffs and see if the Devils can compete for a cup. But got to crawl before you walk. Check out Daniel's stuff at the Hockey Writers and check out his respective podcasts. Shout out the Devils. Daniel, thank you for taking the time to appear on this show. And like I do to close out every episode, continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for listening. Once again,